How much do you really know about medieval women? What if everything you thought was true about their lives from the 5th to the 15th centuries was just a shallow guess? What if they were not always silent, submissive figures locked away? Number 10. Everyone believes all medieval women were illiterate and uneducated. Picture a medieval castle, its stone walls standing tall against the sky. Inside, you might picture knights, lords, and maybe some scribes hunched over parchments. You might think of ladies in fine gowns, perhaps embroidering by the fire, but never with a book in their hands, certainly not reading its words. This image, so often painted in stories and films, suggests that the world of learning and letters was entirely closed off to women. It implies that for a woman in the Middle Ages, education was a distant dream, an impossibility. The idea is that knowledge, particularly written knowledge, was the exclusive domain of men, especially those in the clergy or nobility, or the select few who pursued scholarly lives in universities. The girls, the common story goes, were only taught household skills, maybe some basic prayers, but certainly not how to read complicated Latin texts or even how to pen a simple letter. This persistent untruth suggests a world where women's minds were not valued for intellectual pursuits, where their voices were not meant to be heard through the written word, and where their contributions to literature, science, or philosophy were non-existent. It suggests a vast, silent gap where half of humanity remained in the dark, unable to engage with the written culture that shaped their world. This narrative leaves out an entire hidden landscape of intellectual life for medieval women. The reality was far more vibrant and complex. Many women across different social strata possessed impressive levels of literacy and education. For noble women, learning to read and write was often a practical necessity, not a luxury. They managed vast estates while their husbands were away on crusades or political duties. Running a large household, overseeing numerous servants, managing finances, and corresponding with other powerful families required a firm grasp of reading and writing. A lady like Eleanor of Aquitaine, a formidable figure of the 12th century, who was queen first of France and then of England, was not just a beautiful face in court. She was highly educated, fluent in several languages, and actively fostered the arts and troubadour poetry. Her court was a center of learning and cultural exchange. She could read, she could write, and she used these skills to navigate complex political landscapes and even to lead armies. Beyond the nobility, convents and monasteries were centers of female intellectual life. For women who chose a religious path, literacy was not just encouraged, it was a fundamental requirement. Nuns spent their lives immersed in prayer, study, and the copying of manuscripts. They read scripture, theological texts, and the works of the church fathers. Many convents maintained impressive libraries, and the nuns within them were often responsible for producing new manuscripts, illuminating them with intricate designs, and preserving ancient texts. Hildegard von Bingen, a German abbess from the 12th century, is a stunning example. She was a prolific writer who composed theological works, scientific treatises, medical texts, and even beautiful musical pieces. Her writings show an astonishing depth of knowledge and a powerful intellect, all cultivated within the walls of her convent. Rotswit of Gandersheim, a 10th century canoness, wrote Latin dramas and poetry, making her one of the earliest known female playwrights in Europe. These women were not exceptions, they represented a significant tradition of female learning within religious houses. Even in urban centers, beyond the cloistered world of convents, some women gained literacy for practical reasons. In towns and cities, wives of merchants often helped run their husbands' businesses. They managed accounts, kept inventories, and corresponded with suppliers and customers. A merchant's wife might oversee the shop, handle sales, and manage the finances, all tasks that benefited immensely from reading and writing skills. There were even women who worked professionally with books. In 14th century Paris, for example, there are records of women who worked as scribes, illuminators, and even stationers, selling books and parchment. Christine de Pizan, a groundbreaking writer of the late 14th and early 15th centuries, supported herself and her family entirely through her writing. She wrote extensively, producing historical works, moral treatises, and even powerful defenses of women's intellectual capabilities. Her famous work, the Book of the City of Ladies, written around 1405, features conversations with allegorical figures about the achievements of women throughout history, directly challenging prevailing misogynistic views. This work alone proves that women were not only educated, but also used their education to contribute significantly to the intellectual discourse of their time. These examples demonstrate that literacy and education were not exclusive male prerogatives in the medieval world. Women, for various reasons and in various capacities, engaged with written culture, shaping it and being shaped by it in profound ways. Number 9. Everyone believes women had no legal rights or agency. The story often told about medieval women suggests they were merely extensions of their fathers or husbands without any real power or legal standing. They are often portrayed as property passed from one man to another, with no voice in their own affairs or in the larger legal system. This common untruth paints a picture of women entirely dependent, unable to own anything, sign contracts, or participate in court proceedings. It implies a legal landscape where a woman's testimony held no weight, where she could not inherit property, and where she was essentially invisible in the eyes of the law, always requiring a male guardian to act on her behalf. This view suggests that marriage was a woman's only path to any form of security, and even then, she lost her individual identity to her husband's. The prevailing idea is that the legal system of the Middle Ages was utterly stacked against women, leaving them powerless and vulnerable, with no means to defend themselves, pursue justice, or control their own destinies. This untruth overlooks the intricate legal frameworks that, while often patriarchal, also contain surprising avenues for female agency and protection. The reality was far more nuanced. While medieval law systems were indeed dominated by men and often favored male heirs, women were not entirely without legal rights or agency. Their standing in law varied significantly based on their social status, marital status, and the specific region or legal tradition they lived under. One of the most important aspects of medieval women's legal rights revolved around property, particularly through dower. Dower was the portion of a deceased husband's estate that his widow was legally entitled to for her lifetime support. This typically amounted to 1/3 of his lands and property. This was not a gift from her husband, it was a right guaranteed by law. A widow with her dower lands could be a very powerful figure, managing her own estates, collecting rents, and making independent economic decisions. She could even represent herself in court to protect her dower rights, suing those who tried to infringe upon them. Margaret Paston, a 15th century English noblewoman whose family letters provide a rich source of historical detail, actively managed her family's estates, engaged in legal disputes, and defended their property interests, often while her husband was away. Her letters show her instructing lawyers, pursuing claims, and navigating the complexities of the legal system with shrewdness and determination. Beyond dower, unmarried adult women and widows often possess significant legal autonomy. They could buy and sell property, enter into contracts, incur debts, and conduct business in their own names. In many towns, women, particularly widows, ran shops, managed taverns, and operated various trades independently. They were recognized as femme souls or single women and were often treated as legal individuals. For example, records from medieval English towns show numerous women appearing in court as plaintiffs and defendants, engaging in litigation over debts, property disputes, and even personal grievances. They hired lawyers, presented evidence, and argued their cases, demonstrating a clear understanding of legal procedures and a willingness to assert their rights. Some women even served as official witnesses or jurors in certain local legal proceedings, especially those involving other women or specific community matters. Even within marriage, a woman's legal identity was not entirely subsumed. While the common law tradition in England, for example, largely considered husband and wife as one legal person with the husband representing the household, certain protections existed. A woman's dowry, the property she brought into the marriage, often remained her separate property or was held in trust for her and her children. This was particularly true in continental European legal systems, where Roman law had a stronger influence. In many parts of Europe, women could make wills, especially if they had separate property, ensuring that their wishes for their belongings were respected after their death. Furthermore, ecclesiastical courts, which handled matters related to marriage, wills, and moral conduct, often provided avenues for women to seek justice, particularly in cases of marital abuse or breach of promise. A woman could petition these courts for separation or annulment, presenting her case and offering testimony. These legal mechanisms, while certainly imperfect and embedded within a patriarchal society, allowed women to participate in the legal system, protect their interests, and exercise a degree of agency that is often entirely overlooked in simplified narratives about medieval women's lives. They were not merely passive recipients of male authority, but active participants in their legal landscape. Number 8. Everyone believes women were confined to the home and domestic duties. A common picture of medieval women places them firmly indoors, forever spinning wool by the hearth, baking bread, or tending to children. This image suggests that a woman's world was bounded by the four walls of her home, that her entire existence revolved around domestic chores and childcare. It implies that women did not work outside the household, did not participate in the broader economy, and had no role in public life beyond their familial connections. This untruth paints a static, unchanging scene where all women, regardless of their social class, age, or location, were locked into a singular, narrow set of domestic responsibilities. It completely erases the vast majority of women who, out of necessity or choice, engaged in a myriad of occupations that contributed significantly to the medieval economy and society. This view reduces women to a single prescribed role, overlooking their dynamic presence in fields, markets, workshops, and even in religious and political spheres. The reality was far more dynamic. For the vast majority of medieval women, work was not confined to the home, it was an integral part of daily survival and economic contribution. In the agrarian societies that characterized most of the Middle Ages, women were absolutely essential to agricultural production. They worked side by side with men in the fields, sowing seeds, weeding crops, harvesting grain, and tending to livestock. They milked cows, made cheese, spun wool, and processed flax. A peasant household was an economic unit, and every member, including women and children, contributed to its output. Their labor was physically demanding and directly supported the family's survival and its ability to pay rents and taxes. Without the consistent hard work of women, the agricultural backbone of medieval society would have crumbled. Beyond the fields, women were deeply involved in a diverse array of crafts and trades in towns and cities. They were brewers, bakers, textile workers, and shopkeepers. Brewing ale was a particularly common female occupation, with many women running their own small-scale breweries. In medieval towns, women often operated stalls in markets, selling produce, dairy products, and textiles. They were active in the bustling economic life of urban centers. In many guilds, which were organizations of craftsmen that regulated production and trade, women were members, often as wives or widows of masters, and sometimes in their own right. For example, there are records of female parchment makers, silk weavers, and embroiderers who were full members of guilds, controlling their own workshops and employing apprentices. The famous medieval tapestries like the Bayeux Tapestry were often produced by skilled female artisans in workshops. Women also held more specialized roles. Midwifery was an exclusively female profession, requiring practical knowledge, skill, and experience in attending to childbirth and women's health. Some women acted as informal healers, using herbal remedies and traditional knowledge to treat ailments within their communities. In religious houses, women were not just confined to spiritual duties. They managed complex estates, oversaw vast workforces, and engaged in administrative tasks, much like powerful lords. Abbesses were significant landowners and employers, wielding considerable economic and political influence. Even in the shadowy world of prostitution, women were part of a recognized, albeit stigmatized, economic sector. The idea that women were confined to domestic duties is largely a product of later centuries, particularly the Victorian era, which imposed a stricter separation of gender roles. In the Middle Ages, necessity dictated that women were active participants in every aspect of economic life, their labor being indispensable to the functioning of society, far beyond the four walls of any single home. Their presence was felt in every corner of the medieval landscape, from the fields to the marketplaces, from the workshops to the hallowed halls of power. Number 7. Everyone believes marriage was the only option, and always arranged, with no love. The prevailing narrative about medieval marriage often paints a bleak picture, a cold, calculated transaction with no room for personal feelings. It suggests that every woman's fate was sealed by an arranged marriage, typically set up by her family for political or economic gain, with no regard for her preferences or affections. This untruth implies that love played no part in the decision-making process, and that medieval couples were simply bound by duty and social obligation, enduring a life together without genuine connection or warmth. It simplifies complex social practices into a single, rigid model, suggesting that all women were forced into unions they had no say in, and that any romantic feelings were either irrelevant or suppressed. This narrative denies the emotional lives of medieval individuals and overlooks the diverse paths women could take, including those who chose not to marry at all. The reality was far more nuanced and human. While arranged marriages were indeed common, particularly among the nobility and wealthy merchants, where alliances and property transfers were paramount, the idea that love was entirely absent or irrelevant is incorrect. Affection often developed within these arranged unions over time, and many couples formed deep, lasting bonds. Letters and personal chronicles from the period often revealed genuine tenderness and concern between spouses. For example, the Passim Letters, a collection of correspondence from a prominent 15th century English family, show numerous instances of affection and emotional support between husbands and wives, even in marriages that were initially arranged. And Margaret Passim often expressed concern for her husband's health and well-being, and he for hers, sharing details of their lives and showing mutual respect. Furthermore, love and personal attraction were not always disregarded in the initial stages of marriage. While parents might have the final say, the preferences of the bride and groom were often considered, especially as the Middle Ages progressed. In some cases, couples were allowed to meet and spend time together before the marriage was finalized, giving them an opportunity to assess compatibility. Courtship rituals, including the exchange of gifts and poetic declarations of love, existed. The concept of courtly love, though largely a literary convention, still influenced societal ideas about romance and idealized affection, even if it primarily focused on extramarital relationships. Moreover, marriage was not the only option for medieval women. For women who wished to avoid marriage or pursue an intellectual or spiritual life, the convent offered a viable alternative. Becoming a nun provided women with a degree of autonomy, access to education, and opportunities for leadership that were often unavailable in secular life. And abbesses, as mentioned before, held significant power and managed large institutions. For some women, choosing the religious life was a deliberate decision to avoid an unwanted marriage or to pursue a path of personal devotion and scholarly pursuits. Even in secular society, some women remained unmarried by choice or circumstance, particularly widows who chose not to remarry to retain control over their dower lands and property. These women, known as single women or femme souls, could lead independent lives, manage their own businesses, and retain legal autonomy. The Church's influence also played a role in marriage practices. Canon law stipulated that for a marriage to be valid, both parties had to give their consent freely. While parental pressure was immense, particularly for young women, a marriage could be annulled if it was proven that consent was coerced. This legal principle, however difficult to enforce in practice, still offered a theoretical safeguard against entirely forced unions. Therefore, while practical considerations like wealth, social status, and family alliances heavily influenced marriage choices, the human element of emotion and individual preference, as well as the alternative paths available, were far from absent in the diverse tapestry of medieval women's lives. The medieval world was not uniformly devoid of love and individual choice when it came to unions. Number 6. Everyone believes women had no voice or influence in society. The common perception of medieval women often cast them as silent figures, relegated to the background without any power to shape events or express their opinions. The prevailing untruth suggests that women held no positions of authority, offered no counsel, and were entirely excluded from the political, religious, and social decision-making processes of their time. It implies a society where women's voices were literally unheard, where their thoughts and ideas were considered unimportant or irrelevant, and where their presence in any sphere of influence was simply unthinkable. This widespread belief paints a picture of a world dominated exclusively by male voices, with women having no means to influence the powerful, advocate for causes, or leave any significant mark on the historical record. This narrative strips medieval women of their agency and denies their active, often profound, participation in the shaping of their world. The reality reveals that women, through various avenues, exercised considerable voice and influence. While direct political power was generally vested in men, women often exerted influence indirectly, and, in some cases, directly, particularly those of royal or noble birth. Queens, for instance, were far from mere ceremonial figures. They often served as regents when their husbands were away on crusades, or wars, or when their sons were too young to rule. A regent queen held immense power, making political decisions, commanding armies, and overseeing the administration of the realm. Eleanor of Aquitaine, who we have already mentioned, was a formidable political operator who influenced the courts of France and England for decades. Blanche of Castile, mother of King Louis IX of France, served as an exceptionally effective regent, suppressing rebellions and consolidating royal power during her son's minority. These women were not just figureheads, they were active political players who could lead armies, negotiate treaties, and administer justice. Beyond the royal courts, noble women wielded significant local influence. As managers of vast estates, they often acted as local administrators, dispensing justice, managing resources, and overseeing the lives of hundreds of tenants. They could be powerful patrons of the arts and religious institutions, directing funds and shaping cultural trends. Their household often served as a social and political hub, where alliances were forged and information exchanged. In the religious sphere, abbesses of powerful convents held immense influence. They managed substantial lands, employed large numbers of people, and often had seats in local assemblies or councils. They could advise bishops and even kings on spiritual and political matters. Hildegard von Bingen, for example, corresponded with emperors, popes, and kings, offering them spiritual guidance and political advice. Her counsel was sought and respected by some of the most powerful men in Europe. Women mystics, such as Catherine of Siena and Birgitta of Sweden, had direct access to high-ranking church officials and political leaders, influencing spiritual reform and even acting as diplomatic intermediaries. Catherine of Siena, a 14th century Dominican tertiary, played a significant role in papal politics, urging the Pope to return from Avignon to Rome and mediating conflicts between Italian city-states. In towns and cities, women also found ways to make their voices heard. Women who ran businesses engaged in public life, negotiating with suppliers, customers, and authorities. They could present petitions to local councils, engage in legal disputes, and participate in guilds. While their formal political representation was limited, their economic activities gave them a practical voice in urban affairs. Even through their daily interactions and the informal networks they built, women shaped public opinion and influenced decisions. Their roles as mothers, wives, and community members gave them opportunities to advocate for their families, their neighbors, and their beliefs. Therefore, to claim that medieval women had no voice or influence is to ignore a complex reality where women, through various means and in diverse contexts, actively participated in and profoundly shaped their societies. Number 5, everyone believes all women were weak and submissive. The enduring image of medieval women often portrays them as frail, delicate creatures, always passive, always submissive to male authority. This common untruth suggests that women lacked physical strength, emotional resilience, and the will to assert themselves or resist injustice. It paints a picture of universal docility, where women simply accepted their lot without question, never challenging norms or fighting for their rights. This narrative implies that medieval women were inherently weak, both physically and in spirit, and incapable of independent thought or action. It strips them of agency and overlooks the immense fortitude, courage, and sometimes fierce determination that many women displayed in their daily lives and in extraordinary circumstances. The reality was vastly different for most medieval women, who were anything but weak or submissive. For peasant women, physical strength was not an option, it was a necessity for survival. They toiled in the fields from dawn till dusk, performing demanding tasks like plowing, harvesting, and threshing alongside men. They carried heavy loads, fetched water, and cared for livestock. Their bodies were accustomed to hard labor, making them incredibly robust and resilient. Life was tough, and survival demanded grit, perseverance, and considerable physical stamina from both men and women. These women were not delicate. They were the backbone of the agrarian economy, their muscles hardened by relentless work. Beyond physical strength, medieval women often displayed incredible resilience and agency in the face of adversity. Women in urban centers who ran businesses needed shrewdness, assertiveness, and strong negotiation skills to succeed in competitive markets. A woman managing a brewery, a bakery, or a textile workshop had to be tough, capable of dealing with suppliers, customers, and apprentices, and defending her interests. She was not a passive figure, but an active economic agent. There are numerous examples of women who actively resisted social norms or injustice. Women appeared in court to sue for unpaid debts, defend their property rights, or seek redress for grievances. They were not afraid to stand up for themselves or their families in legal settings, even against powerful individuals. The wives of knights and lords, often left in charge of castles and estates during their husbands' absences, frequently had to defend their homes against attack. They oversaw fortifications, organized defenses, and commanded garrisons. For example, during the Hundred Years' War, women like Jeanne de Clisson, known as the Lioness of Brittany, famously turned pirate to seek revenge after her husband's execution, leading raids against French ships. While an extreme example, it highlights a spirit of defiance and agency that contradicts the submissive stereotype. Even within religious life, women demonstrated immense strength of character. Mystics like Julian of Norwich or Catherine of Siena, while embracing spiritual devotion, also exhibited powerful intellects and unshakable conviction, challenging established norms and influencing religious and political figures. Nuns often fought to protect the autonomy of their convents from male ecclesiastical interference. Their quiet strength was often a force of nature, moving mountains within their religious orders and beyond. In the realm of domestic life, a woman's role as a mother and manager of the household often required incredible fortitude. She was responsible for the well-being of her children, for managing resources, and for maintaining family stability amidst disease, famine, and conflict. Childbirth itself was a perilous journey that many women undertook multiple times, showcasing immense physical and emotional strength. The notion that medieval women were universally weak and submissive is a romanticized, often inaccurate portrayal that ignores the harsh realities of their lives and the remarkable strength and determination many displayed in simply living through them, let alone actively shaping them. They were survivors, innovators, and often fierce protectors of their interests and their loved ones. Number 4. Everyone believes women only existed as wives and mothers. The popular imagination often limits medieval women to two primary roles, wife and mother. This pervasive untruth suggests that a woman's entire identity and purpose were solely defined by her marital status and her ability to bear children. It implies that any other aspirations, talents, or contributions were secondary, irrelevant, or simply non-existent. This narrow view ignores the vast spectrum of lives that medieval women led, the diverse professions they engaged in, and the significant contributions they made to society beyond the domestic sphere. It reduces their multifaceted experiences to a single, prescribed path, overlooking their roles as independent economic agents, spiritual leaders, artists, and educators. This untruth simplifies a rich historical landscape, erasing the individuality and agency of countless women. The reality shows that while marriage and motherhood were indeed central to the lives of many women, they were far from the only avenues for female existence or contribution. As we have seen, medieval women engaged in a wide array of occupations that extended far beyond the home. Women were indispensable in agriculture, working in the fields alongside men, performing heavy manual labor essential for food production. In towns and cities, they were active participants in the urban economy. They ran businesses as merchants, brewers, bakers, innkeepers, and textile producers. These were not just supplementary activities for many, they were their primary means of livelihood, supporting themselves and their families. The records from cities like London and Paris reveal numerous women operating independently, managing their own workshops and engaging in trade. They were recognized as economic actors in their own right, contributing significantly to the prosperity of their communities. Beyond the secular workforce, religious life offered a profound alternative to marriage and motherhood. The women who chose to become nuns or beguines found opportunities for intellectual pursuits, spiritual devotion, and community leadership. Convents were centers of learning, where women read, wrote, copied manuscripts, and engaged in theological discussions. Abbesses held significant administrative and spiritual authority, managing vast estates and overseeing large communities of women. The Beguines, a lay religious movement that flourished particularly in the Low Countries from the 12th century onwards, allowed women to live together in religious communities without taking permanent vows, combining spiritual devotion with active participation in urban life, often earning a living through weaving, nursing, or teaching. These women were not wives or mothers in the traditional sense, yet they formed vibrant, influential communities. Furthermore, medieval women pursued various artistic and intellectual endeavors. As patrons, they commissioned elaborate manuscripts, built churches, and supported artists and writers. As artists themselves, women were often skilled illuminators, creating intricate decorations for religious texts. Many women were scribes, meticulously copying texts in scriptoria. While less documented, women also contributed to oral traditions as storytellers, poets, and musicians. Christine de Pizan, as noted earlier, was a professional writer who supported herself through her literary work, producing historical, moral, and political treatises. Her existence directly challenges the idea that women's roles were narrowly confined to the domestic. But moreover, even within the roles of wife and mother, women often held significant power and responsibility. A wife was the mistress of the household, managing finances, overseeing servants, and raising children, especially in noble or wealthy merchant families. She was the economic and social manager of the domestic sphere, a role that required considerable skill, intelligence, and authority. The sheer diversity of roles, from laborers to abbesses, from merchants to mystics, clearly demonstrates that medieval women were not confined to a single, predefined existence. Their lives were rich with varying responsibilities, opportunities, and contributions far beyond the narrow scope of being solely wives and mothers. Number 3. Everyone believes medieval medicine offered no help for women's health and childbirth was always a death sentence. The common understanding of medieval medicine often paints a grim picture, especially concerning women's health. It suggests that medical knowledge was rudimentary, based on superstition, and offered little effective treatment for any ailment, let alone the complex issues specific to women. This untruth often emphasizes the dangers of childbirth as an almost certain death sentence, implying that women were simply left to fate with no skilled assistance or interventions. It portrays a medical landscape devoid of specialized care for women, where doctors were predominantly male and ignorant of female anatomy, leaving women vulnerable to suffering and high mortality rates, particularly during pregnancy and delivery. This perspective simplifies a complex reality and overlooks the significant, albeit sometimes imperfect, medical practices and dedicated care providers that existed. The reality was far more structured and attentive to women's health than commonly believed, even if it operated within the limitations of pre-modern scientific understanding. While medieval medicine certainly lacked modern surgical techniques or germ theory, it did have a recognized tradition of addressing women's specific health concerns. Medical texts from the period, particularly those influenced by ancient Greek and Roman, works like those of Hippocrates and Galen, and later translated and commented upon by Arab physicians, contain sections specifically devoted to women's diseases. These texts discuss menstruation, conception, pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum care, offering various remedies, herbal concoctions, and practical advice. One notable text, the Trotula, a collection of 3 treatises on women's medicine from 12th century Salerno, Italy, is a testament to this specialized knowledge. While the authorship is debated, whether by a single woman or a school of female practitioners, the Trotula demonstrates a deep understanding of female anatomy, gynecology, and obstetrics, advocating for practical, often remarkably sensible, approaches to women's health, from skincare to difficult births. Midwives were central to medieval women's health care. They were highly skilled, experienced female practitioners who specialized in assisting women during childbirth. While midwifery was an exclusively female profession passed down through generations, combining practical knowledge, empirical observation, and traditional remedies. And midwives were present at almost every birth, offering comfort, guidance, and practical interventions. They understood the stages of labor, knew how to manage complications, and possessed knowledge of herbal remedies to ease pain or induce contractions. They were not just passive attendants, they actively managed deliveries, and their skills were often crucial in ensuring a successful outcome. Their training was informal but thorough, based on extensive hands-on experience. While childbirth was undoubtedly risky due to infection and lack of advanced medical procedures, the presence of experienced midwives significantly improved outcomes for many women. It was far from an uncontrolled, unwatched event leading to certain death. Beyond childbirth, women sought remedies for various ailments. Herbal medicine was widespread, and women often had extensive knowledge of medicinal plants and their uses. They prepared poultices, infusions, and tinctures for a range of conditions. Women also served as nurses, caring for the sick within their families and communities, especially in times of plague or other widespread illnesses. Religious orders also played a role, with nuns often providing nursing care in infirmaries. While male physicians existed and increasingly gained prominence, particularly in urban centers, many women continued to rely on female healers and midwives for their health needs, particularly those related to reproduction. Therefore, medieval medicine, despite its limitations, was not a void when it came to women's health. There was specialized knowledge, dedicated practitioners, and a range of treatments aimed at supporting women through pregnancy, childbirth, and various ailments, making the notion of universal neglect or certain death an oversimplification. Number 2. Everyone believes women had no role in culture or art. The common perception often suggests that medieval culture and art were almost entirely the domain of men. It implies that women were mere subjects in paintings or poems, but never the creators, patrons, or influential figures behind the artistic and intellectual output of the era. This untruth paints a picture of a culture without female voices, where women did not contribute to literature, music, visual arts, or the shaping of intellectual trends. It suggests that women lacked the education, the means, or the permission to engage with the vibrant artistic and cultural life of the Middle Ages, effectively erasing their presence from one of the most defining aspects of the period. This belief overlooks the significant and multifaceted ways women participated in, shaped, and preserved medieval culture. The reality reveals a rich tapestry of female involvement in medieval culture and art, both as creators and as patrons. Women, particularly noble women and abbesses, were incredibly important patrons of the arts. They commissioned elaborate illuminated manuscripts, often including their portraits or dedications to them. They funded the construction and decoration of churches, chapels, and convents, influencing architectural styles and artistic themes. For instance, the magnificent stained glass windows, sculptures, and altarpieces found in numerous religious institutions were often made possible by the financial support and artistic direction of female patrons. Their wealth and taste directly shaped the visual landscape of the medieval world. Eleanor of Aquitaine, as mentioned earlier, was a celebrated patron of troubadour poetry and courtly literature, fostering a vibrant cultural scene in her courts. Beyond patronage, women were active as creators themselves. In convents, nuns were often skilled scribes and illuminators. They meticulously copied religious texts, biblical commentaries, and other works, adorning them with intricate initials, border designs, and miniature paintings. Some of the most beautiful and well-preserved medieval manuscripts were produced in scriptoria within female religious houses, demonstrating a high level of artistic skill and dedication. Hildegard von Bingen, in addition to her theological and scientific writings, composed a vast body of liturgical music, primarily plainchant, which is still studied and performed today. Her compositions are unique and complex, showcasing her profound musical talent. In the realm of literature, women were not just passive muses, but active writers. Christine de Pizan stands as a prime example of a professional female author in the late Middle Ages. She wrote poetry, allegories, biographies, and political commentaries, including her famous The Book of the City of Ladies, which systematically celebrated the achievements of women throughout history and defended their intellectual capabilities. Her work was widely read and influential, directly challenging the misogynistic narratives prevalent in her time. Other women wrote devotional texts, letters, and chronicles, often providing unique insights into their lives and societies. Marie de France, a 12th century poet, wrote a collection of narrative lace, short rhyming tales that explored themes of love, chivalry, and social critique, establishing her as one of the earliest known female French poets. Women also contributed to the performing arts. While often less formally documented, women participated in folk dances, sang songs, and were involved in various forms of storytelling and oral traditions within their communities. In some contexts, women also played musical instruments. The active role of women in producing and shaping culture extended to domestic crafts, such as weaving, embroidery, and tapestry making, which were highly skilled art forms that conveyed symbolic meaning and social status. These were not mere hobbies, but vital expressions of creativity and cultural transmission. Therefore, the idea that medieval women had no role in culture or art is a gross misrepresentation that ignores their diverse and profound contributions, both as inspirers, financial supporters, and direct creators of the enduring cultural legacy of the Middle Ages. Their creativity enriched every facet of medieval life. Number 1. Everyone believes all medieval women were European and white. The common image of a medieval woman is overwhelmingly that of a white European. This pervasive untruth suggests that the Middle Ages, a period roughly spanning from the 5th to the 15th centuries, was exclusively populated by people of European descent with no racial or ethnic diversity. This narrow portrayal is often reinforced by popular media, textbooks, and art, which tend to focus solely on Western European experiences. It implies that women outside of the specific demographic did not exist or played no part in the historical developments of the period, thereby erasing the rich and varied experiences of women from other cultures and continents who were very much a part of the global medieval world. This deeply ingrained untruth limits our understanding of the true geographical and cultural scope of the Middle Ages and ignores the profound diversity of its inhabitants. The reality is that the medieval period encompassed a vast geographical area far beyond the borders of Western Europe, and it was inhabited by an incredibly diverse population of women from various racial, ethnic, and religious backgrounds. The medieval world was interconnected through trade routes, migrations, conquests, and religious pilgrimages, creating a mosaic of cultures and peoples. While European history is often the primary focus, the Middle Ages also include the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic world stretching from Spain across North Africa and the Middle East to Central Asia and parts of Asia and Africa. Women within these diverse regions lived lives just as complex and varied as their European counterparts, with their own unique challenges, opportunities, and contributions. In the Byzantine Empire, for instance, which was the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East, women held significant positions. Empresses like Theodora and Zoe Porphyrogenita wielded immense political power, influencing state policy, engaging in diplomacy, and even leading armies. These women were not white in the modern sense of a singular European racial identity, but part of a multi-ethnic empire. Byzantine women also contributed to religious life as empresses and abbesses, and to culture as patrons and artists, similar to their Western European counterparts, but within a distinct cultural and religious framework. The Islamic world of Middle Ages, often called the Islamic Golden Age, was a beacon of intellectual and cultural flourishing. Women in this expansive empire, which included people from North Africa, the Middle East, Persia, and parts of India, were incredibly diverse in appearance and cultural background. Many women were educated, particularly in wealthy urban centers. They could be poets, scholars, legal experts, and business owners. For example, Fatima al-Fihri, a Muslim woman in 9th century Fes, Morocco, founded the Al-Qarawiyyin Mosque and University, one of the oldest continuously operating universities in the world. This institution became a major center of learning, and her story highlights the significant role women played in intellectual development outside of Europe. Women also engaged in trade along the Silk Road, managing caravans and participating in cross-cultural exchanges. Even within Europe, the population was not uniformly white, as we understand the term today. There were Jewish communities across Europe whose women lived under different legal and social conditions than Christian women, but who maintained their own cultural traditions, often highly valuing female literacy for religious purposes. There were also people of African descent in medieval Europe, often through trade or as enslaved individuals. Historical records, visual art, and skeletal remains provide evidence of their presence in various regions, including England, Spain, and Italy. For example, depictions of the Adoration of the Magi sometimes included a black magus, reflecting the growing awareness and presence of African people in Europe. These women, whether from Jewish communities, Islamic lands, or of African heritage, were integral parts of the medieval world, their experiences adding layers of complexity and richness to the history of the period. To claim that all medieval women were exclusively European and white is to erase the vast interconnected global history of the Middle Ages and to perpetuate a deeply misleading and Eurocentric view of the past. The medieval world was a vibrant tapestry of diverse cultures, peoples, and, crucially, women.